In this episode, we speak to performance triple threat and my new friend, Nicholas Arnold. Nicholas is a comedian, he's a singer, he's a performer, he's traveled all across Ontario delivering performances to retirement communities and to the youth now. And I was really excited to have him on the show because we were able to dive really deep into storytelling and his experience as a filmmaker and the impact that that's had on his ability to create and tell stories. We talked a lot about comedy and how to infuse more comedy into your performances. And then overall, we talked about the delivery tactics that it takes to keep, whether it's young audiences or, like I said, retirement commuters, older audiences, engaged throughout your entire presentation. I think you'll love the show. This is I Will Teach You to Speak. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
This is exciting because when I write questions for interviews, there's like 5 or 6 things that I really wanted to know. But then as soon as I start to get to know someone, I'm like, man, there are hundreds of questions that we could dive into. I think most interestingly, though, is you're the first person I've ever interviewed that I didn't know in person prior to being on the show. So tell us a little bit about how did this come to be, first of all, and then why you reached out and what strategy are you aligning with there?
Yeah, that's right. Because we don't know each other, but we do actually have mutual friends, and that's how I kind of came to know you through people like Carl Richards, who's another speaker.
Yes.
I think you've done the Mo Mondays, a few of those.
Yeah.
And one thing that I always try to do, and I think we all should do this in whatever business we're in, whether it's just as an actor or a performer or a speaker, is I try to look at other folks, especially folks who are close to my age, who are doing the same thing. So I think I just saw you pop up randomly, and I found a couple of your talks online, watched you, discovered your blog, I Will Teach You to Speak, and then discovered this show. Mm-hmm. And usually, and what prompts me to reach out to someone, especially in terms of being a guest on their podcast or something like that, is if I'm listening to an episode and I find myself sort of chiming in my head. Cool. And joining the conversation in my head. I like that. Then I know that that's kind of someone I want to have a conversation with and probably potentially, learn a lot from with that conversation. So I reached out to you. Knowing full well that my style and what I do is a little bit different from some of the people that you've spoken to thus far. But just to see if we could have an interesting conversation out of that email. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to having an eclectic of a group of people on this show as possible so that the listeners get a ton of value. Really, the goal of this is to be useful for people. And I've done an intro already, but as a filmmaker and a performer and an entertainer, right off the bat, what are some of the things you've picked up on over the last couple of years in terms of performance tactics that's really served you well?
Yeah, well, I kind of reached this epiphany a couple years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, where I just realized how interconnected all of that is and just how related all of that is. And that, when you're a speaker, you very much are a performer still. Yeah. At least I think the best speakers have that innate quality with them.
Yes.
And of course, as a performer, as an actor, you're invoking those same sort of public speaking skills that so many speakers work at developing and harnessing. I do a show right now and I've been touring with it for about 2 years. That's sort of a concert style.
Okay.
It's a biography show about 2 comedians in the 40s and 50s, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And I'm Nick in that show. I'm not playing a character. And that show kind of allowed me to have these opportunities to speak to an audience, to break that fourth wall and tell this story. And that's when I realized, like, man, this is all the same. Mm-hmm. Whether you're talking to a school and just delivering sort of a talk, or in this show, which is scripted, but still kind of delivering a sort of emotional talk to an audience, it's all very, very much the same. So when I had that epiphany, doors started kind of just opening up for me. Because I think when you kind of realize a path for yourself,
yes,
you start to zero in on what you need to do to make more of that path happen. And so once I realized that I could, there's a bit of a stigma, especially in the entertainment industry, where it's like, well, I think any industry where you need to be doing one thing. Are you a film director?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't be a film director and an actor. Maybe you can, but not really.
Yeah.
Are you a comedian or are you an actor? Are you a musical theater guy or are you this?
Yes.
And the more I'm in this industry, the more I'm starting to realize that you actually can kind of have your hands dipped in a few of these things at the same time. And there's power to that if you can do it well.
I feel like you're reading my mind, because that was a great segue into what I was thinking about. Is the value I see in the experience you have is you've dabbled in filmmaking, you've dabbled in comedy, I've seen some of your YouTube videos where there's no voice at all and it's just performance. The type video was such a sweet example of that. It was like tens of thousands of views.
Yeah.
Now you're doing talks with youth where it's
Mm-hmm.
more of a public speaking dynamic. So in terms of the tool belt that you've been able to collect on different strategies and tactics that you are now pulling out to have better performances, is there 1, 2, or 3 actionable items that we can start to experiment in our communication skills like today that you found valuable that you think other people can take advantage of?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I mean, you learn this as an actor when you go into the audition room is to really nail an audition, or at least be confident in it.
Yeah.
It's not just about the lines on the page, if you're just focused on, getting all these lines and sort of just worrying about what your next word is and what the next sentence is, you're not in the moment with it.
Yeah.
And you hear that all the time as an actor. It's about being in the moment. And when you're in the moment, you're then able to make choices based on motivation. So as an actor, your motivation might be, where is this next sentence actually coming from emotionally?
Okay.
And I think as speakers, we can use that same sort of tactic, and so one thing to break that down, to simplify that, is to know what you're talking about well enough that you can then be present in the moment with it. And not just be going, beat to beat to beat to beat.
Yes.
Because even kids will pick up on that.
Yes.
Even kids will pick up on just the wheels turning of you kind of standing there, I am saying the speech that I worked really hard to memorize.
Yes.
Right. But if you know your material and it's coming from the heart and you've rehearsed it enough to a point that it's genuine, then you can start being present with it. And then that goes in, we can talk about delivery and all that kind of stuff, but definitely I think just know your shit, know your stuff.
Tell me where your mind goes when I say this, but I feel like that's the difference between using your conscious mind to deliver your performance and then using subconscious, which I think is infinitely more powerful. And if you focus less on what to say and more on being there and stage presence, I think the unconscious gets activated, but it's only when, like you said, you know your shit. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, I've done very minor improv stuff, just to the extent I'm not an improviser by any stretch of the imagination, but I do, with some of the shows I've had to interact with audiences. So I might be delivering a talk, and especially I've toured retirement homes. I've done that sort of stuff where interruptions happen,
I can imagine.
But what that trained me to do was to have the flexibility to go with the flow and tap into that subconscious thing. And I think, if you're completely panicked on what you need to say and just getting from the beginning to the end and getting every little paragraph, you're going to get through it. You're going to deliver a talk, but what's the level of sort of connectivity that you're going to actually get there? And I think, as you said, when you tap into that sort of subconscious level and it's just sort of flowing, then you're on to something a little different. And I think when you look at the best speakers and what they deliver and what their stage presence is like, that's what they're doing. They're in the zone.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you or many of the audience listeners are fans of Christopher Hitchens, but Hitchens is just so well read that there's no way he could possibly be consciously thinking about what he's going to say before he says it. He is like total on autopilot. he's just such a brilliant guy, and then it comes off in his sub communications that it's totally natural. He's totally flowing. So I agree 100% with that.
But Jonathan, sorry to interrupt you, but you tap on another point right there, like just being well read. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
If you're talking about actionable stuff that you can start doing right now, it's just if there's a topic you want to talk about, just start educating yourself constantly, you know, and then you're just going to have the toolkit in your brain.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. So that's one piece. Be well prepared, come from the heart, try to take advantage of flowing and being in the present. Any specific tactics on delivery? I know you're doing a lot of more public speaking focused with youth specifically. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that project's like, what are the type of themes you speak to, and then some of the delivery that helps engage that type of younger audience.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because it's kind of the same delivering to youth. It's the same tactics that I would use to deliver to seniors in retirement.
Great.
Just in the sense that it's like, okay, you've got a group of people who, depending on the environment that you're delivering your talk in, aren't necessarily all on board with you at the beginning. You know, if you're going to a school, it's a mandatory assembly that they're, you know, coming into.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's a Monday morning, you know, whatever, right? If you're going into a retirement home, you know, this is their environment. They're coming into their community center. They don't know what's going on. So you're dealing with audiences that aren't necessarily 100% on board with you. So you have to kind of like be right there and come in not too strong, but you'd have to kind of come in with that sort of zest and energy, you know. But then it's also a matter of, again, this goes back to what we were talking about. It's got to be genuine, because they'll pick up on that if it's not. If you're just coming in and just like, okay, yo, you know me, like I'm, you know, it's Nick Arnold here, like yo, you know, just trying to be cool and hip with the kids. You got to you bring an element of yourself, but just make sure that it's like, hey guys, I'm on your side.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and that comes with the content. I think when you start delivering stuff that's personal. So let's say your topic is, I mean, I talk a lot about using your talents to make a difference, just because that's how I spent a lot of my high school career. I was doing a lot of charity work and this kind of stuff, but it was all talent based. So I was producing these talent shows. I made a feature film about bullying and all that sort of stuff while I was in high school. So it was very much, you know, skill, talent, and passion oriented work.
Okay.
Well, because I come with that sort of personal baggage, I'm able to sort of lead with that in a talk to youth. It's like, hey guys, listen, you know, when I was your age, you know, this is what I was dealing with and this is what was going on, you know, and getting on their level, understanding that it's like, hey, you know, I know you guys have all this stuff going on, you know. Getting on the level of seniors in retirement homes is easy because I'm, you know, doing a nostalgic act. But with kids, it just takes that extra little bit of work of, it's like, you know, and it helps that you and I are somewhat younger because we don't look, you know, that much older.
It's more relatable.
And then in terms of the delivery, I mean, we can go into the sort of step-by-step breakdowns, but it is a performance. It is a performance. So, you know, really work at where your hook is, you know, and don't rush through that. And when I say hook, I mean, that's that moment where you think, at least in writing the talk, that this will be the moment that I get them, that I have their attention, from the introduction to the, hey, here's where it lands, you know, and don't brush through that. There's got to be a little, you know, dramatic pause, all that sort of stuff. And that just that's the same tools that an actor uses when memorizing a monologue and finding the beats, you know, and all that sort of stuff. Is that, I ramble a little bit there, Jonathan.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah. And there was a lot of like quality gems in there. And just to make sure that we're hearing you correctly, part of that is coming in, not being over the top, but making sure that you get buy-in from the audience pretty early. Being genuine. It's telling personal stories. One thing that, one of my favorite idioms of all time, my friend Ian Gabriel, who's an amazing communicator, I think he summed up what you were describing there pretty good. It was meet people where they're at before you take them where you want them to go.
100%. That's exactly what I was trying to say in better words, for sure.
Ian said it, not me. So build that relatability, meet them where they're at, then don't go too quickly over the hook. And pause when necessary, slow your cadence down. That's part of that delivery piece. Is, you know, sometimes it makes sense to go fast. Sometimes it makes sense to pursue speed and then as you slow things down, people can feel the difference. And now this new rhythm and this new pace allows people to think in a different way and actually connect with what you're saying.
It's like a piece of music, right? It's like, even like as you're leading up to that hook, you could build up that pace, and that sort of like rapid fire a little bit with the sentences, and then boom, you land and you've got their attention.
I
And
love
it's,
that.
and you looking at them and make that eye contact and that sort of thing. That's where you're invoking these sort of performance tactics. And that's where I consider speakers very much performers.
Yeah, I think one of my mentors, Ryan McGurr, if he ever watches this show, will love what you just said. He's been trying to nail into my head since day one, since we've been working together, that oratory is like music.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, it totally is. Well, as soon as you said the word cadence, I'm just like, yep, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Hey, let's talk about your filmmaking a little bit, because one of the tools that we're always trying to develop as communicators is effective storytelling. And you may have had many experiences that have helped you develop your storytelling experiences, but filmmaking is awesome because now you have to really consciously think about this journey that you're taking your audience on. So I'm curious, how has that impacted the way you think about storytelling, and how can we start to be better storytellers in our communication?
Yeah, it's one of those things that because you're kind of always in the thick of it, you never really have the opportunity to step outside and analyze it. But hearing you even just ask that question, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Actually, yeah, it does again relate. Once again, I think just segueing from what we talked about a couple questions ago, it's again, when you bring something personal to it, you're on board. Storytelling, why are you delivering this talk at the end of the day? Like, why are you the guy? If you're just talking about a general message, fine, but why are you the guy to do it? And you're going to have a stronger talk if there is that little bit of a personal aspect. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he was even just delivering Apple products, it always came from an emotional point in all his talks. There was also always an emotional crux that was a sort of personal story or something like that. And I think as a filmmaker and just as a writer and that sort of thing, I've naturally learned over time just how to build an arc, So we talked about sort of building up to that moment where there's the hook, and then kind of coming down from that, and that's basic sort of storytelling stuff. I think one thing you want to learn is whatever the sort of length of your talk is, you want to have almost like a 3-act structure in the middle of it. Or sorry, you want to have a 3-act structure throughout.
Okay. Is that something you picked up in acting or filmmaking specifically?
Yeah, I mean, filmmaking, a screenplay is built on a 3-act structure. So you have act 1, which is your inciting incident, and that's the thing that propels our hero into whatever journey it is. So it's Luke Skywalker meeting Ben Kenobi and being told, he's a Jedi, or he can be a Jedi. And then you've got your act 2, which is the sort of the meat, and you spend time in act 2 where you can just get the information out that you want to do, your bullet points, all this kind of stuff. That's the meat of the story, right? Where all the action's going to happen. But somewhere in there, you also want to reach a bit of a climax, you want to, and whatever that is, if it's something that's really going to bring your point home or really stress it, it's going to come before your sort of call to action, because that's your act 3. But reaching the climax at the end of act 2, it's got to be something that warrants the call to action.
Yes.
Because if you've just been talking for an hour nonstop, just giving points, you get to the end and it's like, and so this is why I think no. Like,
and we've seen those.
Totally. Emotionally tell the audience why you're now going to call them to action, which could be considered your little act 3. So it'd be helpful. I think it's helpful to sort of, just break down your talk into those 3 sort of story structures, and even just look at how a story is told in that way, because it very much is, you have your inciting incident, which is your hook as a speaker,
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's really valuable. And I think we can even take it one step further and get a little bit more detail here. I want to talk about the project you're working on right now with youth and using your talents to be able to make a difference. Can you share, you don't have to go through the entire story, but how are you using the 3-act structure right now in that pursuit? Or did you think about it that way? Or how are you thinking about delivering that talk?
That one's a little different, and it is growing because it is a relatively newer thing that I've been doing, and I've been doing it in different lengths, like the talk in different lengths. I've done 10-minute, 20-minute, and in October I'll be doing closer to an hour.
Awesome.
Type of thing. So I'm building that. So actually, I'm in the process of kind of now building sort of 3-act structure.
Okay.
With that, because when you're doing a 10-minute talk, there's not as much room to do that.
It's like one story you get to tell, and then you
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, I mean, I can give an example because I take basically this idea of sort of impossible dreams. That was something I always sort of lived by as a kid, was dreaming these sort of impossible things and making them possible. So, when I was 14, I wanted to make a feature film by the time I graduated high school, and I wanted it to involve hundreds of youth and all that sort of thing. So when you're 14, that sounds
ambitious, man.
and it's impossible, right? And so I was all about sort of doing projects like that seemed daunting and impossible and not doable, and then making them happen. And that's sort of the start of my talk, is sort of like going for those impossible dreams, all that sort of thing, because by doing that and showing that things like that are possible, you are sort of changing the world. You are showing people what they're capable of. So I start with this story about an incident of bullying where I was tormented by these kids in elementary school. And this one kid, made me a bet in the bathroom. We're 10 years old, we're in the bathroom there. And this is sort of my main tormentor. And he made me a bet that I would never in my whole life become a filmmaker. And he bet me $1 million, and we wrote it on a little paper.
Okay.
And he shook my hand. And so somewhere out there, I'm owed $1 million, because whether I'm a famous filmmaker or not, I've made 2 feature films.
We did it.
And then from there, we kind of just start moving into, and then, so that's my act 2, is what were those, the film that I made was all about bullying. And now we're talking about, okay, how can you actually use these, talents and skills and these impossible dreams to make a difference? One thing I really struggled with, and I think a lot of artists do, is because I had this sort of philanthropic vibe to me, or this thing of wanting to help.
Yes. I
felt guilty about, is it egotistical to want to be a filmmaker and an actor? And that's kind of where my talk goes, is it's like, listen, you guys have dreams. All you guys have these big dreams of what you want to do and what you want to be. Here's how you can achieve those dreams and also make a difference, inspire people.
Yeah, I love that. Pursue both at the same time and get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. One thing, there's a charity that my friend runs called Trek for Teens here in Toronto.
Okay.
And it's all about, they help homeless youth, and they send their money and funds raised directly to shelters in Toronto. And they've since grown. They've become a registered charity and all that sort of thing. But one of the things they do is it's all about youth so the events that they have are, it's a cabaret, there's talent shows, there's a fashion show. What do these things have to do with homeless youth? Nothing really, except for the fact that you're showing what youth are capable of. You're showing adults what youth are capable of, and therefore it is related to sort of what their cause, So they're a great example of that sort of thing, of using your talent skills to do these impossible projects and make a difference.
I feel like this is such a smooth podcast, because one of the things that I love about communication and developing a voice, being able to have a strong message, something you care about, something you're advocating for. Charity work's clearly important to you. When I was reading through your bio and some of your experience raising tens of thousands of dollars for cancer research, I know that you were recognized by the TD Bank for leadership in the community. So can you share a little bit about why that's important to you, and then how you're using your voice today, besides the speaking to youth, which is honestly fantastic? Anything you're really passionate about right now, or anything you want to advocate for moving forward?
Yeah, I still carry all those passions with me, because they're so near and dear to my heart when I've spent that much time doing them. Of course, as we enter our 20s, it becomes very it's survival for the most part.
Yeah,
so it becomes very difficult. Yeah, it becomes, I've struggled with that sort of difficulty of still being able to do that. And there's been a lot of guilt over the years of not necessarily having the time, the means, or or the funds to do that,
Yes.
to do the same amount of work that I was doing in high school. Because in high school, you just you have that benefit of just being able to make that stuff sort of happen, you
Yeah, you
know?
live with your parents and
Yeah.
no
You
bills.
don't realize how good you have it, you know? So now in doing some of even just the talks that I'm doing, I'm getting back into that. And I mentioned the Trek for Teens. I've spoken for them a few times. I've
Awesome.
hosted some of their events, and then I've just volunteered
Awesome.
for them a bunch. And I've learned a ton about the actual issue of youth homelessness through them, which I just wasn't aware of until I met up with them. But I mean, cancer was something that ran through my family, and it's still a very sort of important issue. And of course, bullying. I mean, that when I made that feature film on bullying, Facebook had just been created, you know, while I was making that film. So it wasn't a thing yet, you know. So social media, online bullying, and just how much that has changed is almost overwhelming right now. And it's to the point where if I were to look at that issue again, I'd really have to kind of re-educate myself quite a bit before delving into something like that. I'm digressing a little bit, but I know,
No, it's so impressive to me to see just like a clearly passionate guy who has a lot of talent, who just has a real ability to make an impact. And like I said, I was talking about my mentor earlier, Ryan McGurr, and he just keeps saying, Jonathan, like the only reason why you should be developing your voice is to help change the world. And if we're not changing people's minds in the world, then you might as well spend zero time and watch TV instead. And
one of the
I appreciate that about you.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, man. I mean, an issue I haven't developed the talk yet, but a talk that I do want to do is because I spent all this time performing in retirement homes. I've also learned a ton about how we treat our elderly here in the West, especially versus like how they're treated in the East and all this sort of thing. And just sort of the needs that they need. And I want to kind of work on delivering a bit of a talk on that issue in terms of bringing sort of worthwhile entertainment to people in need, people who can't necessarily get out to the theater and all that sort of stuff. So that's something I'm sort of just tapping into right now and sort of exploring. I've written an article that's getting published on that, and then I'll try and expand on it and develop a bit of a talk. But yeah.
Okay. Two last things I want to cover quickly is one is personal brand and the way you think about your long-term vision for personal brand and how you're actually executing that on a day-to-day. And then if it aligns, maybe it's separate, but how do you find gigs today? Because there's a lot of people here who want to make the transition like you just told me earlier, where they had a full-time gig and now they're able to actually pursue their passions full-time because of a strategy, or they built their personal brand up to a point and they were able to finally get consistent gigs. So are they aligned, building your brand and getting gigs, or is that something totally separate?
Well, of course they're aligned. And building the brand, I mean, I had to come to this kind of realization of what am I? Because I never felt part of the filmmaking community. I just never felt like, even though I was a filmmaker, I never quite felt like a filmmaker when I, network with others. Yeah. And I never felt like a musical theater guy. I didn't go to Sheridan and all these musical theater schools. So, and I'm not, an amazing singer. I can sing, and I do sing in my shows, but so I never felt like that. And I never quite felt like an actor either. I'm, not versed in like all these plays. So I really struggled with, okay, what am I? And speaking's not something I do full time. So I'm not even a speaker, and so then I started, it's like, okay. And I really started just embracing the words entertainer, performer, you know?
Yes.
And what that means. And I am a bit old school with my stuff, but what's nice about that is in the old school, back in the day, the cabaret performers, that is what they did. They did it all. They did all these sort of things. They were multiversed. And that, again, I mentioned how when I started sort of embracing that aspect about it, doors started opening, when I came to these realizations and epiphanies. They open because when you realize what you are, kind of who you are and what it is you want to do, the answer is you're not just suddenly like, I'm an entertainer. Wow. Like I'm getting emails all of a sudden, and like gig requests.
There's some work involved.
There's some work involved, but you start to realize what's not the right path.
Okay. I like that.
So in doing that, you're then just able to focus. I mean, it's like I had a conversation with my agent, where I told her all this, and I'm like, hey, I've had this realization. This is kind of what I want to do. I want to do more, hosting gigs. I want to do more, stuff like this. blah, blah, blah. And she was like, that's great, Nick. You know, I don't have the connections for that. You know, I can get you the film and television and auditions and that sort of thing. But if you want to go and do that thing and do all that, and yeah, it's not a clear-cut answer, but at least, you know, having that dialogue, it shows me, okay, you know, my agent's good for this and this. I need to find other avenues, right? And right now, it's still very much is a solo venture. But one thing that I've been doing, I'm bringing on an assistant within the next week.
Cool.
A student intern
Awesome.
who's helping just to do some of the cold calls. I mean, it's not like I'm not going to be doing the cold calls myself, but just sort of attacking it as well from a different angle, and having someone else do that. Because I've spoken to some mentors of mine where that's been a successful avenue.
Okay.
And then, you know, Jonathan, it's funny because when I tell people that I'm, you know, this is what I'm doing full time right now for the next little bit, you know, it is that thing of, it's like, wow, like you're so lucky and all this sort of thing. But that luck also may run out in 4 or 5 months, and not, you know, all that means is there might be a lull where there is no work. If you're embracing this lifestyle, you have to embrace the fact that it may come with dark periods.
Totally.
As an actor, if you're going for it and you're like, this is what I want to do, there's going to be times where you just don't have a gig, where the industry is slow.
Yes.
And so you just have to decide if you've made enough, if you've figured out enough to coast in those periods, or if you've got other revenues of income, you know, and that can be still stuff with your business, other avenues, whether you've written a book and you're able to make money off of that book. You know, it's funny because the speaking gigs that I have booked in the fall are what's helping me in dark periods between acting gigs.
Yes.
So between the two, I'm able to I'm making a living, you know, boom, boom,
great.
boom. So yeah, it's about having avenues of income, multiple streams of income. And now you have to be okay with, is one of those streams of income just a part-time job where I'm, you know, flipping burgers? And if that's not what you want, then okay, fine. Hit the drawing board and figure out what other avenues of income can be for you and get those all going, you know?
Yeah, fantastic. No, I hear exactly what you're saying. There's real work involved. Having diversity in your income streams is going to be valuable, especially if you may have, like you said, it's cyclical sometimes. And then other than that, as long as you're really putting in the effort to do business development, like you're saying, get on the phone, meet people.
Yeah. Well, stuff like this too. I mean, you know, we've just, by having this conversation, we've met, and it's also, it's not about meeting people. It's not about networking too. Like, I'm not looking for something monetary out of this with you, and you're not looking for something like that either. Right. But we've connected, and there is a relationship that can build from that, naturally, you know, without us even thinking about it down the road. So that's the kind of connection you also want to be doing in networking. It's not, don't ever network with an agenda.
I love that.
You know?
I'm literally reading right now. It's pretty funny. It's very ironic. I've been, over the past couple of lunches, I've been reading a book called Never Eat Alone, and I've been eating alone, reading this book, trying to get through the book. But eventually, when I'm through the book, I'll probably end up spending more time at lunch with people. But one of the big themes was, do not have an agenda, and know that through networking, the best thing that you can do is have generosity and try to bring more value to the relationship than you're trying to pull and extract out of it, which aligns really well with Gary Vee's philosophy around friends and content, etc. The last thing I want to ask you is about just anything personal on your heart, any philosophy that you wanted to share, anything you came across recently that's really resonated with you. The thing I'm always conscious of asking questions and interviewing is that I direct the conversation. This is your opportunity to direct it, take it wherever you want, and tell the audience what's on your heart.
Sure. Well, actually, I stepped away from sort of the day job, as it were, in mid-August. And one thing that I've been doing, and it's been working really well for me, is all revolving around self-discipline. And I think as performers and speakers, we have to start looking at ourselves as entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And adopt the same work ethic that someone who's starting a self-starter or a business would have.
I love that.
So, you know, without anybody forcing me to it, I've been forcing myself to get up at, 7 a.m. On this period that, I don't have a gig. My gigs for the fall start late September.
Yeah.
So this is my time, But I've been forcing myself to get up and have that discipline. So I get up and I've got my whole mindfulness routine and all that sort of thing.
Awesome.
Cause that works for me.
Good.
And then I do, a half hour of uninterrupted, creative writing. And some of that might turn into, an article that I try and get published. Some of that just doesn't get seen, but it's just, a half hour of that.
Yes.
And for me, what I'm saying with that, I mean, that's my routine, but for me, I think having a routine. Now, if you've got a night gig and you wake up, it doesn't have to be a morning routine. If you wake up at noon because you work, late, fine. But having a routine once you do wake up, I think is just so important for that self-discipline. And it's the self-discipline that's going to generate that work. So if you're just tying back to that other question of what can we do to get more gigs, be self-disciplined. Have the structure in your day to actually, we can get all spiritual with that and talk, sending vibes out into the universe. But basically what you're saying, the message that you're saying is, I want gigs.
Yes.
I want to work. You're sending that message out wherever it's going, even if it's just the glow on your face, when you feel like you've had a productive day. So that's something I've discovered recently, is the self-discipline thing. And that's, if I can pass that on to people, it's really working for me. And I think it can work for others too.
That's fantastic, man. And I found it worked in my life big time, making sure that I'm dragging myself out of bed, hitting the gym so I can be productive.
Yeah.
And like you said, you have no boss. You're your own boss. Nobody's holding you accountable. No one's looking over your shoulder. It's complete autonomy. It's up to you to be able to get the work done. So a valuable lesson. I'm glad you've learned it early, since you've just jumped in feet first. And I'm looking forward to all the big things that come over the next couple months. I know that you're going to strike gold. I know with your work ethic, your discipline, your talent, things are going to be very bright for you moving forward. Big doors are going to open. I'm really excited about the relationship, and thanks for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was a great chat.